So let's start with problem number one. We're just going to jump right into this and hopefully get through them, and hopefully that will leave us some time for some questions at the end. So number one is, how do I create content that works with all the different devices, Apple, Android, Blackberry, etc., that people are bringing to work? So as I'm sure you're aware, there are a proliferation of devices in the marketplace. Some of the new ones, such as Google and Amazon, that I have here first, and then some of the older ones, Android, Apple iOS. None of them are very old, obviously. It's an exciting time with a lot of new things happening. But players are entering all of the time, and it used to be that organizations would dictate what kinds of computers you would use. And that may still be true for desktops, but it's very difficult to do that with mobile devices, even though some organizations are doing that. They're buying iPads, for example, for everybody in the organization to try to standardize. But many organizations are trying to grapple with the fact that this adoption is so rapid that the users and the learners, in the case of training, are coming to work with whatever device they have. So how do you deal with that? I'm going to pause, and we're going to get to know you a little bit with regard to this particular question. And so I'm going to do a little poll here. And I've just launched this question, which is, what type of device do you know that your organization is going to need to support? And incidentally, Google, Amazon will fall under the Google Android category. It's an Android, and so is Google. So you might classify all those under Android, but I think Google and Amazon have their own unique offerings. So once most of you have voted or selected all that apply that to your organization, I'll release this so you can see the results and kind of get an idea of what this is like across the spectrum. We've got over 150 people attending in this webinar today, and so this will be kind of instant research in the market today. So we've got about 75% of the people that have voted or clicked on the results. About 80% now. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share that with you. So you can see that there's a need for most of you to support lots of different platforms. Of course, Apple being the market leader, almost all of you say you need to support Apple. But many of you have to support all of these different platforms. And it seems to be constantly changing. Some organizations losing market share and so on. So how do we deal with that particular issue? Before we get to the solution on this question, I want to learn a little bit more about you as well. So I'm going to launch a few other polls. This one is just, how many years of experience do you have with e-learning in general? And it'll be interesting for you all to see what your fellow participants are like in terms of some of these questions. So again, we're nearing about 80% voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share it with everyone. So e-learning has been around long enough that very few of you have not been involved in some kind of e-learning. Now, we're going to have another question that has to do with mobile learning and kind of compare the results a little bit. But you can see we have a broad spectrum of experience level in the audience here, with 20% of you having been involved in e-learning more than 12 years. To give you a little bit of my background, I created my first e-learning course using an old tool called Toolbook back in 1998. So some of you in that category probably did some of the same. A lot has changed since then. So I'm going to hide this, and let's ask another question. That relates to mobile learning. Where's your organization in regard to deploying learning to mobile devices? Are you already doing it? Are you planning on doing it? Some people think that mobile learning is just a fad, and I've made a lot of efforts in my conversations to help people understand how this is not a fad. It's changing everything. And so it's interesting when I ask this question in different webinars how rapidly the adoption is happening in mobile learning. So again, we're nearing 80%, so I'm going to go ahead and share the results here. So about a third of you are doing it already, which is great. You're jumping in, early adopters, and getting it done one way or another. Almost half of you aren't doing it yet, but are planning to do it within the next 12 months. So that means within 12 months, roughly 80%, 75% I guess of you, 3/4 of this audience is going to be doing mobile learning. That's a pretty rapid adoption rate. When I had a similar webinar to this about a year ago, there were less than 10% doing mobile learning, and most of it was planning to do it but not within the next year. And a lot of people are realizing that we have to move quickly in this area. So thanks for sharing that information. Very, very interesting. All right, we're going to go back to the slides here and talk about the proposed solution to this. So we have all these different platforms and devices that people are bringing to work. How do we create content that works on these different devices? And there are really several different ways to approach this. And I'm going to tell you the way that we decided to approach it. And you can decide whether that's best for you or if you want to go some other route. But one of the ways is every platform has a way to create a native app. So in the App Store for Apple, you can pay some money and become an Apple developer and download their software development kit. And if you know how to program, then you can build your own native app. And the advantage of this approach is that you can build specifically for that device or that platform. And so you get a very tailored experience for that specific platform. So if you know that your users are only going to be iPad, are only going to be iPhone, or only going to be on Kindle Fire or something like that, and you want to create a very high-end experience that is tailored just to that platform, this may be one way to do it. The disadvantages, of course, are you have to know how to do this, or you've got to hire somebody to do it that knows how, and it's usually pretty expensive. The other disadvantage is you have to create a separate app for every course, essentially. And it's just not a very scalable solution. Kind of harkens back to the early days in e-learning when people were building e-learning courses just from scratch on all different platforms and different ways. And that still happens today in some sense. But most e-learning courses are now developed in more scalable ways. But you do get the advantage of full custom experience. Another solution, number two, is using standards-based cross-platform authoring. And I'm going to combine that with solution 3 because this is the approach that we took. A standards-based cross-platform authoring solution means that you only have to build it once and it'll work on all the different devices. So you can do that on your own, or you can choose to use a vendor's mobile learning authoring tool like Rapid Intakes. You just want to make sure that you verify which platforms the solution is going to work on when you go out and look at vendors. So what is the standard and how does that work? The cross-platform standard that's going to work across all of the mobile devices that are late generation devices is HTML5. And you've probably heard of this, but I want to spend just a little bit of time explaining what this means because there are a lot of misconception about what HTML5 is. Most of you have heard of HTML, which is just the language that you use to build web pages on the internet. HTML5 is the 5th version of that language. So that's no big news, I suppose, or big surprise. But when people say HTML5, they don't usually mean just the HTML. So the version of HTML5 that everyone talks about has some new things in it that it supports that previous versions didn't have. But when people say HTML5, they really mean usually a collection of technologies, including HTML5, cascading style sheets version 3, and JavaScript. And if you look at what they're used for, the HTML5 is often used for layout, some aspects of it, and CSS can be used for that as well, and video. The CSS 3 has some great animation kinds of things built right into it, and JavaScript is used for interactivity. So when people say HTML5, it's really this combination of things. And you can build all this just from scratch. You can just get out your text editor and start typing away if you know these programming languages. But if you want to try to build using HTML5, you can also use some frameworks. So there are some free frameworks that you can download at different sites on the internet. And a framework is a collection of already pre-programmed things that tries to help you develop things faster than just starting from nothing. So these are some free tools you can download and work on. If you have a programming bent, it's kind of fun to play with these tools. You may or may not want to stick with them as your ultimate solution, but I think it's instructive to go out and understand what they're all about. So let me share a couple of slides about them. Sencha is what we consider the premier HTML5 framework. And it's called Sencha Touch for mobile devices. And frameworks exist for almost any programming languages. There are PHP frameworks. There are frameworks for VB script and things like that. All kinds of different frameworks for different programming languages. This happens to be what we consider to be the leading framework for HTML5 for mobile development. It is very programming oriented, so if you're not an experienced programmer, you'll be easily overwhelmed. But if you are an experienced programmer who understands object-oriented programming and the MVC model, then this may be an area that you want to get into. But it's interesting to go and just look at it, check out some of their samples. And this is the framework that we chose to use as the basis of all of our solutions. But again, you could go out and use this framework on your own. And it's a very, very solid framework with lots and lots of support. So that's one possible solution. Another one that's a little more approachable is JQ Touch. If you know how to edit HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and you're not really a hardcore programmer, but a little bit of a hack, this is something you can start building content in fairly quickly, JQ Touch. And you can just download the sample and kind of play around with it and see how it works. jQuery Mobile Framework is kind of in between as well. It's a little bit more approachable than Sencha, but more challenging than JQ Touch. So these are 3 free frameworks for HTML5 that you can use to build your own HTML content. Now, if it's free, why would you ever want to go with a vendor like Rapid Intake? Well, we've spent thousands of hours basing starting from the Sencha framework and creating a rapid development system. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time in that, but you'll see some aspects of that as we go through this. If you're more interested in that, just go to our website and sign up for a free trial, or ask one of our salespeople for a demo. So HTML5 is the solution that's going to work across the board on these different platforms. All of these solutions do require a later generation device that has a touch screen. If you're going to try to deal with old generation Blackberries and things like that, you're going to have to just use HTML for the most part. That's my recommendation. Straight HTML, not HTML5, nothing too interactive. And that can be a big challenge as well. So moving on to problem number 2. So do I have to create 2 different courses for my content, one for mobile and one for desktop? Right? You've already got a course, some safety compliance training or something, and you've been using it. Now everyone wants to take it on their mobile device. How do you deal with that? Do you need to create a completely separate duplicate, or is there some way to maintain it in one central way? And that was one of the questions we were asking too, because we have long since had authoring tools for e-learning, and we decided that it makes sense to include the desktop as one of the devices that people use. So they might use an iPad, an iPhone, and their MacBook, or just a PC, a desktop PC, or some other laptop, or any other combination of mobile devices and, of course, their desktop. So we devised a solution where you can build a course once and it publishes in formats that will work on the desktop and mobile devices. And I would recommend that, regardless of whether you use rapid intake or not, that you try to take a similar approach, because if you have lots of courses that you're trying to build, you basically doubled or tripled your maintenance requirement, because you've got to think about addressing tablets and smartphones and desktops. So if you're trying to address all of those possible format or form factors, then you're tripling your maintenance work, which can be very difficult with large numbers of courses. So at Rapid Intake, we have 2 different formats that your content, when you build it, publishes to. First, it publishes to Flash for desktop. And I still hear a lot of talk about Flash being dead. It's not dead. It's certainly receiving waning support over time. But Flash is still the very best solution for publishing content to desktop browsers. And there are a couple of simple reasons why. First of all, it works the same in all browsers. And not everybody has a browser that supports the latest versions of HTML5, and so you're going to get different experiences, things breaking, not working. Flash will make sure it works in every desktop browser. It's also more secure on the desktop than HTML5 is. On the mobile side, of course, Flash is not really an option, and so that's where HTML5 shines. So in our opinion, the best solution would be a solution that produces Flash for desktop consumption and HTML5 for mobile consumption. That's exactly what Rapid Intake does. If you don't have a solution and you're building from scratch, you may have to publish 2 different versions of your course. And again, that's not recommended, but if you don't have too many courses, maybe that's workable. But we really recommend going down a route where you can build and maintain your course in one authoring environment, and it works in both platforms, both desktop and mobile. The way to do that, if you were going to do it from scratch, is you could build an XML-based system where the HTML reads the XML and the Flash reads the XML. So you're still building in one environment, but you have HTML5 that's reading the content from there and Flash that's reading the content from there. And that's essentially what we've done in Rapid Intake. You could build that from scratch if you're a programming type of person. Not that I advise it. So we have many years into it, but it is possible. And if you're trying to do simple things, that may be something you want to try. Okay, problem number 3. How do I handle user interface design? This is something that we grappled with as well, coming up with our solutions, because you have, first of all, the question of desktop versus mobile. How do I deal with the user interface design? Am I going to just take the design that I have on desktop and make it work on the iPad, or on and how in the world would that work on a smartphone? And so the other question is, what if the desktop interface uses things like mouse over activities? Well, there's no mouse on a mobile device, so how do you deal with that? The other question is, what about tablets versus smartphones? I mean, there's such a big difference between the form factor, the screen size on a smartphone versus a tablet, that you need to think of ways that might be addressed. So what I'm going to do to explain this is share with you a sample that shows kind of how we address that. So give me just a moment to switch screens and jump over here and look at a sample. So this is a simple example, but in Rapid Intake, when you are creating content, you can preview your content in desktop and mobile. So you build once and then you preview in both places. Here's the sample course here. And you can see that we have a standard interface and so on. Now if we go over to the tablet, just expand this window a little bit. I apologize, I think the screen sharing is slowing me down a bit for some reason. So apologize for this delay. I'm having some technical difficulties on my computer here. Let me just turn off screen sharing to see if this is going to help. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's helping. So Chris, if you're on the line, can you tell me, when I share my screen, what are you seeing there?
We see the mobile preview with the landscape mode of the 10-inch tablet. So you're on the, looks like the definitions page.
Okay, so we're seeing the same thing. For some reason, this browser is just not functioning real well at the moment. So let me address it this way. You can see that in the tablet we have all of the controls showing, the table of contents showing, at least in the landscape mode. If we were to rotate this, which something's going on with my browser at the moment, but if we were to rotate this, the table of contents would hide, and so it shows up as a pop-up and so on. But in a tablet, we have a lot more screen real estate. If we were to go to the phone view, which I'll try to do and see if this will work for me. what we get with the phone view is we have controls that don't show up automatically. When we hide those controls, we're just immersed in the content. Then we can tap to bring up the controls, and this allows us to make as much use of the screen real estate as possible. So it's important to think about the user interface and how it might differ on a smartphone versus on a tablet, and of course how it might differ from a mobile device to desktop. Another thing that's different is just the size of things. So on the tablets we have all the images showing up larger initially, and of course you can zoom in and all of that. On the smartphones they're initially smaller. You still have the zoom capability and so on. So that's one aspect of that there. And I'll show you some places you can look at some samples, and hopefully you'll be able to see those better than what's happening with the screen sharing here. So I guess the thing that I want to emphasize here is just that you want to think about the user interface design. And when we tackled that problem, we decided the mobile experience needs to be a true mobile experience, not some knockoff of a desktop experience. And so we designed the mobile player for the content to take advantage of the mobile experience with swiping and rotation between landscape and portrait and things like that. When it comes to interactivity, for example, on the desktop there was a mouse over activity for terms and definitions and matching. And I was hoping to show that to you, but unfortunately can't at the moment. But on the tablet, we redesigned it so that instead of mouse over, it was a tap, and matching instead of drag and drop, we did a little different way as well. Depending on the screen real estate, we could have done drag and drop, but we wanted to make sure that the activity worked on smartphones and tablets. And dragging and dropping on a smartphone can be a little bit more challenging because it's so small. So that's important to think about how you'll deal with the screen real estate sizes. So again, I recommend using interfaces that hide the tools on smartphones and content that will work on both tablets and smartphones. You can exclude one version or one form factor. Some organizations are just doing iPads or tablets, for example. But our philosophy is that the course should be very functional and usable on practically any device that the learner wants to consume it on, because they may not always have the preferred device. So the next problem is, what is the best instructional design methodology for mobile learning? And I want to address this with another question. Two questions really. Key question, do people learn differently because they are on a mobile device? Another way to put that is, has something changed in their brains because they are using a mobile device? I hear so much talk about how we should do this or that instructionally on mobile devices. And in reality, these are all just gimmicks, in my opinion, from people that aren't really thinking about true instructional design. I'm not saying that there aren't techniques that you can use to get people more engaged on mobile devices and things like that, but when we're talking about effective learning, our brains are not any different because we're on a mobile device, although you could argue that we're all addicted to mobile devices now and something's changed there. But when it comes to learning, we still learn the same way. So instructional design is really the same. I also hear the argument that we should create just small little pieces of information for mobile devices, especially smartphones. But no one's going to want to go through an entire course on a mobile device. And I would argue it's just the opposite. People would rather go through the entire course on a mobile device than on a laptop or a desktop, because they can take it anywhere they want. And for an example of how much content people will consume using mobile devices, let's just look at ebooks. Ebooks are huge growing market and very rapid adoption. And most of us have probably read a book as an ebook. And so I would argue that people are more than willing to consume content, large amounts of content, on mobile devices. It just has to be designed well for their experience. And I'd argue that they're even more than willing, but more likely. There's already some anecdotal evidence that people are more likely to finish a course if it's delivered on a mobile device. So that said, I think that it's important, and not just for mobile devices, to ask this question. We could have a separate topic just on this, but do they really need training, or do they just need performance support, a job aid? Right? And that's not specific to mobile. That's really a question we should ask anytime we think we should build a course. Do they have to learn this, or can they just use something to remember how to do it or be guided through it? Some things, of course, people have to learn and have to have in their brain for any moment. Other things, many, maybe most other things, just need to be accessible. So mobile devices could be used for performance support. Instead of building a full course, build a few pages that teach how to do something, a step-by-step interaction or something like that. All of that said, I do want to point out my favorite recommendation on instructional design, and this is especially good if you don't have a background in instructional design. There's a paper called The First Principles of Instruction by Dr. M. David Merrill, and you can get it at his website for free if you just go to the papers section at mdavidmerrill.com. And it has a very practical, pragmatic approach to effective learning, and he based this on gleaning through research done by many, many other instructional design figures in the industry. And I won't go into all the details now. We have a separate webinar specifically on this. You can go and look up rapid or instructional design for rapid e-learning development on our website. You watch a recording of that webinar. But the crux of it is that when you're building content for learning, you want to make it problem-centered. And then, of course, these other areas, activation, demonstration, application, and integration, are important. And I encourage you to go watch the webinar or get the paper from Dr. Merrill's website. It's very practical, which is what I appreciate about Dr. Merrill. So if you're looking for actual instructional design tips, again, I recommend the webinar. But in general, my answer to the question about what kind of instructional design should we use, well, it's whatever kind of instructional design that you feel is going to help people learn the most, and the device doesn't really matter. Now, some people may argue with me on that, but that's my strong opinion. Okay, problem number 5. How do I communicate with the learning management system? When you create a mobile course, where is this content going to reside? Is it going to reside on your server and they access it through the internet browser of the mobile device? Or is it going to be inside a native app on the mobile device? These are all important questions to think about when you're thinking about how to communicate back to the learning management system. So what we decided to do at Rapid Intake is we decided that our initial solution is to create a web app that feels like a native app, but it runs over the internet, and you can load it onto your learning management system. In fact, if you create a joint package that is designed for desktop and mobile, the learner goes in through their mobile device, through the internet browser, accesses the learning management system, finds the course, and launches it. If they're on a mobile device, the HTML format will come up. If they're on a desktop browser, the Flash format will come up, but it's all the same course, and the bookmarking syncs across all the different devices. So this is a direct connection to the LMS through the internet. It requires an internet connection. So if you're going to build something on your own, you're going to have to figure out how to make that work. And it will depend on your learning management system's standards, whether it's SCORM or AICC and so on. And on that note, I'm going to ask another poll so we can learn about your learning management system and kind of see where everybody's at on that. So the question here is, how does your learning management system track progress? And this is, in general, you're going to want your mobile courses to plug into your learning management system. And again, we'll wait for most of you to vote, and then we'll share that with you. So again, we're nearing 80%, and I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share that so you can see results here. So it's not a big surprise. Most of you have learning management systems that use SCORM. That's one of the industry standards. The other one is AICC. It's an older standard. Some of you aren't sure, and that's completely fine. It's something that you'll want to find out if you care about tracking quizzes and scores and completion and those sorts of things. And about 10% of you don't have a learning management system yet, which is fine too. I would highly recommend looking at the Litmus learning management system. It's a very simple, easy to use LMS that people are adopting very rapidly because it's been designed to be easy to use, whereas a lot of learning management systems are like wrestling with gorillas. Not a lot of fun. So I'm going to hide this and come back to that. There's another way that we can communicate to the learning management system, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the question you have to ask yourself is, how do we get this content onto the device? And the easiest way is just to make the content reside on your learning management system and have the mobile device connect through the internet to the LMS. The problem is, what happens if you don't have an internet connection? And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so this is the question. So we've got 2 bonus questions. So I know we were going to have 5 big problems here, the top 5 problems. But there are two other things that I think are important to be concerned about. What if my learners experience internet connectivity problems? How do we help them take their courses offline? Again, you can create a standalone app in the first place and just have them take that offline. And that's a fairly easy route to go if you want to, if you don't care about tracking, because they can just download it from an enterprise app server or through the App Store or Marketplace and take that. The other thing you could do is create a content management app. And this concept is they download one app and then they can download additional courses into it. Think of in-app purchases or in-app downloads, where you've got a kind of a shell app and then you download courses into it. And that's the approach that we decided to take for offline connectivity. And so, of course, the thing that we generally recommend is, instead of building these things on your own, you can purchase an existing offline mobile learning solution like Rapid Intake. It's called mLearning Sync. And so mLearning Sync allows the learner to install a native app that's branded for your organization, and that's installed on their device, and then when they're online, they can download the content. So it kind of works like this. So the learner, through the internet, downloads the content from the mobile synchronization server, which is part of mLearning Sync, and they download it into their native app. Then when they go offline, they can take the course, their videos, their quizzes, whatever interactivity, and so on, and it'll still track everything. Then once they're back online, it'll send this data back up to the sync server for reporting purposes. And this can be synced back to your LMS as well. So again, there's 2 different philosophies about how to deal with offline content. One is just build a native app. Another one is have an app that other content gets loaded into, so you don't have an app for every single course. So with mLearning Sync, you can have one app that's for your company, and your learners can download content into that. They could have 100 courses, but it's still on one app. And there's a lot of nuances about how to manage that, security and all of that, but that's kind of a quick overview. So if you're more interested in that, just contact us. But that's an important thing to consider because mobile devices being so mobile often can lose internet connectivity. So the last problem and solution we have here is what's changing right now in the mobile learning space and how can I be prepared for it? The most important thing to be aware of right now is the tin can standard. So tin can is a data or learning tracking standard that allows you to track learners' progress like SCORM and AICC, but it works in a completely different way. So I'll share a few slides about that. Right now, we have the LMS that launches the course, and the course plays kind of in this little shell of the LMS, and it's called the SCORM API if you're using SCORM. And you have to have this connectivity all the time to the LMS for it to track properly. And it works fine, but it can be a real bear to set up, and of course you have to have the internet connectivity. So one of the things that you can do with Tin Can is basically track learning that happens anywhere, because we're not necessarily launching the course from the LMS. We're launching it wherever it is. And when the learner does something, completion, whatever, it then sends the data to a Tin Can tracking system. And some LMSs, including the Litmus LMS, are beginning to adopt the Tin Can standard. And this is great for mobile learning because the learning can happen anywhere, and then it records it in this LRS. It's kind of a new term. And these activities can happen anywhere, including on mobile devices. So they don't have to be connected. They do have to be connected to send the message over the internet, but until you send the message, you don't have to be connected, and you don't have to launch from the LMS. So you can just keep your course anywhere and launch it from anywhere. So this is something to keep your eye on and to learn more about. Just be aware of that. If you're looking for an LMS, definitely look for one that supports or has plans to support Tin Can, because Tin Can will be the new standard for data communication and tracking for mobile learning, no doubt about it. So that is a summary of everything I wanted to share with you. I'm going to leave this slide up for a while I am answering some questions in case you want to try some samples. And you can find these samples on our website. If you want to just navigate there with your mobile device, you can do that. Or if you have a code reader on your mobile device, you can just point at the screen now, and hopefully these are sharp enough codes that they'll pull up the right URL and you can try some of these samples out on your mobile device. Some interesting points about these. Fighting cancer and customer service. These are both, I think all three of these first three samples are all desktop and mobile. So you might consider going to these samples on our website as well with just on your desktop browser and seeing that when you just go click on the sample, it'll pull up the Flash version. So again, it's one set of data driving both the desktop and mobile experience. So with that, I'm going to pull up the question panel, and we'll see if we can answer some questions. Okay, Carla says, what do you recommend to do if we have 200 courses developed in Flash in order to deliver them in mobile? That's a great question, and this is the situation that many people find themselves in. And if you need to develop all of them into mobile, there are a couple of different solutions that I would propose. First of all, you're going to need to move to an HTML5 solution. So that's the first thing. So I would look for a way to move to HTML5. Second, your assets, meaning images and all of that, inside those Flash movies need to be extracted so they can be produced in HTML5. Now, one thing you can do with some mobile Flash content is you can convert it to video. So if it's an animation and those sorts of things, then you can convert to video, and there's some utilities and things on the internet that will just convert that Flash movie to video. So that's one quick way to do it. There is no quick solution to this whole process, unfortunately, but if you want something that's really going to work, you're going to need to make the effort to convert all of those, and that's something that you can do on your own, or you can hire an organization, and that's something that we do for our customers that need that as well. We also have some partner organizations that will have programs that extract content from the Flash movies. So they can take all of your Flash movies and it'll extract the images, audio, things like that, and prepare all those assets so that you have a way to get ready to make that conversion happen. So if you want more details about that, maybe we could talk about your specific situation offline, but that is definitely something that you have to think about. The other thing I would recommend is I would not necessarily suggest that you convert them all at the same time, or even all of them. You may want to be choosy about which ones you move to mobile and which ones you don't. And some are still just accessible only on Flash because there's a return on investment in terms of the effort it takes to do that. And I would recommend that moving forward that you make sure that you develop in a way that works on both sides, but I wouldn't necessarily rush out and try to convert all of them to mobile right away. Maybe the thing to do is to convert them as they come up for renewal, or when it's time to update them. Just some other thoughts that I would consider. So I hope that helps a little bit. All right. One of our participants says, does Rapid Intake allow the user to create custom colors, background images, logos, etc., or would it be locked into a handful of preset templates, buttons, and colors? So there is a software development kit that comes with our solution that allows you to completely change the interface, look and feel. And so there's quite a variety of things that you can do with that. And you do most of that through CSS editing. And so you can see in one example, this example here is quite different from these others. Right? So these two templates are the same, these healthcare, but these other templates here are different. And you can make your own template. And this one has a background image and so on. So again, to answer your more detailed questions, you probably need to get in a conversation where you can see if what we do meets those needs. But okay, I'm going to go on to some other questions here. So there's another question about, I need an answer for both AICC and SCORM, and Rapid Intake can publish to both AICC and SCORM. So that's one thing you may want to look at if you have both LMSs. So Carla said we couldn't hear clearly which LMS would you recommend if you don't have one. It would be Litmus. It's Litmos, Litmus LMS. Let me just jump over to the Litmus website. So this is a great learning management system that I highly recommend. And this is a learning management system that is part of a sister company to Rapid Intake, designed for very ease of use and very efficient use. It's a great platform. So another question is, how does Rapid Intake compare to Articulate? And it's too long of a question to get into the answer to that, but a fundamental difference is that our solution is a web-based collaborative authoring environment that allows you to scale the development effort as needed in your organization. That's one of the most fundamental differences in terms of how content is created, and there's integrated course review and things like that. Apart from that, I would just prefer to take that question offline so we can answer any specific questions you might have about that. There are a number of significant differences. So Jason asks, would I need mLearning Sync with HTML5? HTML5 allows the browser to store data offline. Why do I need mLearning Sync? Well, that's a really good question, and we asked ourselves the same question because you're right that HTML5 has an offline database kind of capacity. The problem is that, well, there are a couple of different problems. When you want to take content offline, it depends on the content. If you're just talking about text and images, you could probably just use HTML5 and the offline capability. When it comes to actually getting video and audio offline, that's another matter. As far as storing the data offline, yeah, you can use the HTML database, and in fact, that's what we use inside of our native app. So let's see another question. Another question about if the slides are going to be sent, and yes, the slides will be available as well as a recording of the webinar, and we'll send a URL out a few days from now. Another question is, what do you do if you have a course developed as an EPUB and then a Flash? I'm not sure if I fully understand the question there, but in terms of what do you do, but I think it goes back to, if you're talking about how do you get it to be on mobile devices, I would still recommend HTML5. You can use, of course, the EPUB format for ebook format. In terms of publishing that to SCORM, I would recommend putting it into a mobile course authoring tool as text, if that's what it is for the most part, and use that SCORM communication that's built in there. That's my first thought anyway. So I hope that helps a little bit. Jason says, if I build for the PC, the UI will not be optimized for the mobile user. Why would I want to do this? I believe I need two different versions to best suit the end users. And that's exactly right, Jason. That's what I'm promoting as well. You need a Flash version for the PC that has its own UI and a different UI for the mobile user. And you could have one UI for everything, but you're not going to get an optimized experience in either platform. So we believe that mobile content should be delivered in the most optimized end user experience so that the learner is more likely to stay with that content. The reason people choose not to consume large amounts of content on mobile devices is because they run into websites or other things that are not designed for those mobile devices. So, if you go to a website that doesn't have a mobile version, then you're not likely to spend a lot of time on that website. And so when it comes to a mobile experience, we believe that the user interface needs to be specifically designed for the mobile experience, and on the desktop, it needs to be designed for the desktop experience. So that's what we recommend. Jason asks, is TinCan a cloud-based system, or is it a design methodology that can be implemented anywhere? It's a standard. It's a methodology more than a system. Different systems can implement it, but you have to have a server called an LRS for reporting from TinCan. And as an example, you might want to just check out scorm.com. It's a company called Rustisi that has kind of headed up this project with the ADL organization. And their LMS is one example of that. And then, of course, the Litmus LMS, LITMOS, is another example of LMSs that use TinCan. And you can host it on your own servers to further answer your question, but of course you would have to have the reporting system installed on your own servers. Manish asks, what do you think about the future of Flash on mobile? I think that it's going nowhere. Adobe's not updating Flash any further, the Flash player for mobile devices. There are some apps that will let you kind of get around that by viewing Flash content over an internet connection, kind of a hack. And I can't remember the names of them right now, but you really, for widespread adoption, there needs to be native support, and Adobe's just not doing that. They officially pulled their support for Flash on mobile. They have not pulled it for desktop. There's still broad support for Flash on the desktop, and we don't know how many years that will continue or if it will just continue indefinitely, but it should for at least the foreseeable future in the next several years. So that's why we believe that Flash is still the best solution on the desktop side, but on mobile, definitely Flash is already out. Mike asks, not sure if this is the place to ask, but is Rapid Intake an add-on to PowerPoint similar to Articulate? No, not necessarily. So we do have some PowerPoint conversion tools, but it's a web-based collaborative authoring environment rather than just being based around PowerPoint. And again, there are a lot of differences there, and won't go into all the details, but not a PowerPoint plugin. Catherine asks, how does Rapid Intake handle 508 accessibility requirements for mobile? At the moment, there is no direct support for 508 on the mobile. We haven't done a lot of testing in that area. That's something that's in our future, but we do have some support for Section 508 on the desktop side. That said, there may be aspects of it that do work on the mobile side. We just have not made it a matter of focus to this point. Tim asks, is learner motivation another challenge in deciding on mobile content? Well, I think that learner motivation is simpler than most of us make it out to be. We think that people need games and those sorts of things, and those can be helpful to get people's attention, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what people really care about is learning something that is relevant, that they care about. So I've seen some text-based e-learning that kept me engaged for a long time. You think about people reading novels. Do they have any special bells and whistles? No, they'll read hundreds and sometimes thousands of pages in a novel because they're so vested in the problems of the characters. And so my contention with engaging the learner is, yes, use interactivity and all of that. We have a lot of interactive games and templates and things like that in our authoring tools as well. But really, it comes down to instructional design, and adult learners need problem-centered, relevant content. And some of that has to do with helping them believe that it's relevant as well. But you may want to look at the other webinar is recommending the recording on instructional design. We go over that in a lot of detail about ways to approach that. But it doesn't have to be expensive or costly to do that. Certainly games can help. Gamification's very helpful, but a game doesn't necessarily keep people engaged in the content as much. The problems, so problem-centered instructional design is where I believe most of the solution lies there. Okay, there are more questions about how does Rapid Intake compare to other tools like Adobe Captivate, Articulate, that kind of thing. So if we could just take those offline, that would be great, because they need to be more detailed discussions, or we can talk to you about that. So one question, you've mentioned that Rapid Intake is a hosted solution. Can we host this in our own environment? There are options to host in your own environment, and certainly the courses you can move anywhere you want. Chris asks, what video codecs do you recommend for HTML5? I'm not a video expert. We use, I think Handbrake is a conversion to convert video, and it puts out MP4 format. Beyond that, you'll have to ask a more video savvy person that question.
It uses the H.264 encoding. It's kind of the same thing as YouTube, and so it's a lot more mobile friendly. Just thought I'd chime in there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Let's see. We'll go a couple more minutes on these questions. Going back to the ability to create your own styles, we have very strict branding requirements. Can you build these within Rapid Intake, or do you need knowledge to create CSS externally? So there are a couple ways to approach that. You can make those changes right within Rapid Intake using the CSS. And we can also help you with that, our professional services. If you have specific branding requirements, you can just give those to us and we can do that for you. So those are a couple of different options there. Chris is reminding me of the name of one of the apps that helps you see Flash movies on mobile devices, and this one's called iSwifter. So just sharing that information. Another question is there a standalone application version of Rapid Intake if I do not wish to use the web-based version? We do have a standalone version, but it does not produce mobile. It's just for e-learning. It's called Proform. You can find that on our website, but if you want to do mobile, you do have to use our web-based version. Okay, another question from Mike is, we're currently evaluating providers to replace our current LMS. We're also looking for an additional authoring tool. I've looked briefly at Rapid Intake, but I'm confused about the difference between eLearning Studio and mLearning Studio. Could you explain the differences, and are they separate solutions with separate pricing? We were referred to Rapid Intake by both Litmus and Torch, which we are evaluating for an LMS solution. Torch is another fantastic LMS, by the way. Let's see. So going back to that, the difference between eLearning Studio and mLearning Studio. There aren't very many differences between the two. One difference in particular, eLearning Studio comes with an interaction builder that has an additional 70 plus interactions that allows you to build those interactions for e-learning. They're Flash enabled only at this point, so they don't work for mobile learning, and mLearning Studio does not come with that, and that's really the only difference. The pricing is slightly different because of that, but other than that, you can do all of the mLearning Studio elements inside of eLearning Studio. So eLearning Studio has a few more features than mLearning Studio, I guess I'll put it that way. So if you have other specific questions about that, please let us know, and we can connect you with somebody who can help you. So another question, will there be possibility in terms of course content for mobile learning and PC learning? And yes, definitely Rapid Intake can produce mobile and PC learning at the same time. Includes images, audio, video, quizzing, interactivity, and some interactions and things like that. Mike says, we tried games and our adult learners were offended. I've had the same experience in some situations. In another case, adult learners love it. I think as the current population gets older and older, meaning the younger population, and they become the adults and they're used to gaming, that'll be less and less of an issue. But sometimes adults think that games can't really help. My experience has been that most people love games if they find that they're instructional and helpful. And some games are designed to really help them learn and still have a lot of gameplay value, so they're fun too. So I think they can be helpful, but I've been in the same situation. All right, this is the last question I'm going to take, and then we'll have to wrap it up here. What has been your biggest hurdle with reconstructing courses for the mobile platform? Do you find that you can't use audio for narration due to the phone? For example, have clients stated they can't use features, etc. How do you get over this? If I understand the question correctly, just the biggest hurdles for reconstructing courses. The biggest hurdle is taking Flash content and getting it into HTML5. So a lot of people have invested time and effort into making simulations in Flash and things like that. By the way, since we're nearing, I'm going to put up my last slide, which is my contact information in case you have any questions. But the biggest hurdle is, again, which we had addressed previously, if you have a lot of effort put into Flash, it's just going to take a lot of time to convert those. And in some cases, you may not even want to convert. We had one airline, a customer that was an airline, and they were training their pilots and mechanics, and they had these very exhaustive simulations built in Flash, and they decided we're not going to recreate these in HTML5, but we are going to make the rest of the content accessible, and then when it comes to the point that they need to work on the simulation, we tell them that they have to go back to their desktop to do that. And I think in some cases that's an appropriate solution, especially based on the amount of effort that might go into making those changes. So that's will conclude our webinar for today. I want to thank you all for attending, and I hope that this has been informative and helpful. And I wish you the best of luck in your efforts to move into the mobile learning space. We would love to partner with any of you that may be interested. And please contact us at rapidintake.com, or you feel free to contact me directly, and I'd be happy to connect you with some product consultants and things that can answer any detailed questions. So thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.